Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empower a Woman show. My name is Amanda and with me on the show today is
Erika Ide Chofu.
And today on the show I've got a guest with me which happens to be one of my really good friends. Angie, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are, what you do and how we know each other.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. It's lovely to be here with you. My name's Angie Petrie. I am part of the team at Beauty from Ashes. And it's just such a delight to be here with Amanda, who I first met at Beauty from Ashes many years ago when Jennifer Rees-Larkham was still in her home. It's one of those things that things pass from generation to generation, and now Carol Bostock carries on that incredible place of Beauty from Ashes, a house of prayer and healing. So do go and look us up, go and find out all about Beauty from Ashes on their website, beautyfromashes.co.uk.
Yes, such a phenomenal place, and I would say I grew up in Beauty from Ashes. It's a place that I had the privilege of calling home. I get the privilege to call Carol mom. I had such a good relationship with Jen, God bless her soul. And it really is a house of prayer, it's a place where you come and you encounter Jesus in a really special way. So I do encourage you to visit the website. There is so much going on in Beauty from Ashes, and I'm sure that there is something that's for you even today. Okay, so we get the awesome privilege about talking about fantastic women in the Bible. We're still in the Old Testament. There are so many women that we get to talk about. And today we are starting with Tamar. Yeah. And there are three Tamars in the Bible, actually. We've talked about the first Tamar, who is the wife of Judah. We talked about her in season 1. Today we are talking about the only recorded daughter of David. The Bible tells us David had something like 19 sons, maybe more, but we only have one record of a daughter of David in the Bible, so Tamar. So we're talking about that Tamar. And then her niece is another Tamar in the Bible. We're not going to talk about her much, but just to recognize the fact that, yes, we've got 3 recorded Tamars in the Bible. Her story is quite a unique one.
Unique is one way of describing it.
Maybe unique is putting it mildly, but let's start with unique. In that she became the object of affection, deep affection of her brother, her half-brother Amnon, to the point that the Bible tells us he was sick from thinking about her. So he'd been thinking about her day in, day out. Tamar is on his mind all the time. Then a cousin, so David's brother's son.
A wicked soul.
Some random person. My sister is ready for this episode today. A wicked soul, a friend, comes and says to Amnon, what's your problem? Why are you looking so downcast? You're the son of a king. Why do you look this way? And he confides in him and tells him he has this affection for his sister. So this wicked friend, uncle, cousin, whatever we're going to call him, then gives him really terrible advice, says to him, why don't you say to the king you're unwell, and then you lie down like you're unwell, and then the king comes to see you and you say to him, I want my sister to come and cook for me, I want my sister to come and feed me, to look after me whilst I'm unwell, and then obviously have your wicked way with her, which is exactly what Amnon does. So he asks the king to send Tamar in particular to come and make him a meal, to cook for him, and she does. And we see in the Bible that when she presents the food to him, he sends everybody else away and he rapes her. This is the second time that rape is explicitly recorded in the Bible. The first time being the daughter of Jacob, that again, we talked about her story in season 1. But what's interesting about Amnon's episode is the Bible tells us after he rapes her, immediately he hates her. In fact, the scripture says, 2 Samuel 13, where you can find her story. So 2 Samuel 13 verse 15 says, then Amnon became extremely hateful toward her, for his hatred towards her was greater than the love which he had for her. And Amnon said to her, get up and get out. Very thin line between love and hate.
Can we roll it back? Because as you were reading or just summarizing what happened, it occurred to me that there are people who would have been through a similar sort of thing that might be listening. So I don't want us to gloss over what happened. And you said unique. I know you used the word unique in a different way. It's not unique in that there might be women who've experienced this sort of thing in today's age and time. We know that there's predators out there, people who've had stalkers or people who just latch onto them and obsess about them. So in as much as it sounds like this very terrible thing that's happening in the Bible, it still happens today, right? Yeah. Maybe not a brother to a sister, but for the people who might be going through such a thing, it doesn't matter that it's a brother or a stranger. So I guess I just wanted for us to sit and acknowledge the fact that this terrible thing, which we're talking about that was recorded in the Bible, we are aware that it still happens today. And there's a God who cares about his daughters, who cares about his people, and who wants to provide safety and comfort and all of that. So I just wanted to sort of say that before we proceeded to your very valid point about a thin line between love and hate.
Yeah, absolutely. So thin line between love and hate. And then she says to her brother, well, don't do this. Instead, ask for my hand in marriage. The king will not withhold me from you. Ask him, tell him that you want to marry me, but he doesn't. He just casts her out. So basically, he just takes her and he throws her out, which is despicable without putting it lightly. And maybe that's why I started with the word unique, because I can't, for the life of me, imagine the kind of hatred that would have come out of a place of love. I haven't seen that anywhere else. We see that
that's not love, though.
So that's the thing, because when it happened earlier on, when Shechem rapes Dinah, the reverse is the case, because he started off with lust, but he gets to the point where I really love this girl, I want to marry her. And then we come to this point where he started with, I really love this girl, I'm sick because I love her. And then suddenly it's, I automatically hate her.
Yeah.
I don't get that. What do you think, Angie?
I think it started even before then. It's when she was pleading, she's not even pleading, she was like setting her boundaries, saying, no, this is not okay. And she was calling him all sorts of things before he raped her. She was calling him out on the law, and he didn't get it. He didn't listen, he didn't hear. His body took over by that point, and he was already, in his mind, he was already there. He was already going to do it. So I think there's almost a turn to hate before he's even raped her. It doesn't say it there, but there's somewhere in, I suppose, in the sense of the story, is that once she's there, and then she started showing her wisdom by saying, no, you're my brother. What about the king? What are we going to be like after this? She's telling him everything to stop him. And it's like his body's taken over. He's lost control.
The lust, because it is lust, because there's a lot of premeditation in this, right? He had been burning and burning and burning with desire for her for a long time. And then he talks to this wicked soul uncle, whatever that person was, I don't know, who says, do this thing. So it was not a spur of the moment thing. It was premeditated. And you said there's a thin line between love and hate. There's probably a very thin line between lust and hate as well. Because that passion, that kind of passion that damns everything, damns the consequences, that's not love at all. That's not love because the Bible tells us love is sacrificial and all of that. This is something else which can only be from the pits of hell. So it's no surprise that that thing pushes him to do all of these despicable things. And I can imagine in the face of that, with this burning, unholy desire, this wise woman speaking the word of God to him. I can only imagine that just even probably made it worse and contributed to him hating her afterwards. It's just a really sad story.
So he drives her out of the house, and she changes her regalia, because when she comes in a princess. She comes in dressed in her royal robes. But now she's been defiled, so she tears off her robe and she's in absolute pieces, as would anybody who has unfortunately been in that kind of difficult situation. That kind of painful trauma, it has a way of changing your identity. And that's one of the things that I see, that she feels like, I'm no longer a virgin daughter of the king. I'm no longer a princess. I'm now somebody that is desolate. And that change of identity comes from a place of deep trauma. And that still happens to us today. I mean, I know that as somebody who unfortunately was sexually abused as a child, what it does to your self-worth, what it does to your identity, how you move from somebody that you think is lovable, and then you move into somebody that you just feel like, I shouldn't be here. I don't even deserve to be wearing this. But there is a God that comes back and restores. There's a God that covers. There's a God that even in the midst of shame would bring restoration in a way that covers. And I just really felt that it was important to say that, so that if your identity has been taken away from you based on trauma, that is not who you are. Just because she had disrobed herself and she's torn off her robes doesn't mean that she's still not the king's daughter. And that's just something for us to hold on to, that we do not let our circumstances or our pain be what becomes our identity. So her brother sees her and he says to her, has Amnon done this to you? So I wonder whether there was already something, Chinese whispers, conversation happening, that people knew what happened to her, and her brother takes her in. And, you know, the Bible records that she lives with him for the rest of her life as a desolate woman, which is unfortunate. But her brother takes her in, and her brother doesn't say anything to his brother. But he has a plan in his mind. You know, he knows what he's going to do. There's one bit of the Bible that records that when David hears, he's furious, but he doesn't do anything. There's no judgment. There's no repercussion. There's nothing done to his son that says, you've done this to my daughter. It's wrong. There's no correction, which then gives her brother Absalom the need to feel like he needs to avenge his sister's honor. So he waits 2 years, very patiently, waits 2 years. And as we can see in the rest of the scripture, invites the sons of the kings to some banquet, and he is only strategic at killing his brother who has defiled his sister. So there was something about that vengeance. What do you think about, I mean, obviously we're not endorsing crime and punishment, but what does that do for you in terms of the honor that he placed on his sister? It kind of reminds me of what Dinah's brothers did in Genesis.
Well, lots of violence, but let's not, that's not the point. I just wonder, so Amnon, let me say it like a Nigerian, with his full chest, did this, and no repercussions, and he was not afraid. I don't know whether this is, you know, they say who the gods want to destroy, they first make mad. Whether God just lulled him into a false sense of security for those 2 years, because he boldly still went to the party and all of that. After you have done that, did he not even see the error of his ways? I don't know, but I am glad that she had someone to fight for her. Right? You know, I'm glad that David did nothing, but her brother did something. He saw the injustice and he took it upon himself to protect, to defend her. And again, just going back to people who have found themselves in situations like this, even when the person that you expect, your father or whoever's in a position of authority that you expect to protect you and to fight for you, doesn't do that. We have a God that will cause someone, you know, to stand up for you. So I think that's where I get comfort from the thought that even though David, her father, who should have been ashamed of himself for sending her into the lion's den, right? Did nothing about it, that God still raised her brother up to avenge her. And hopefully that gave her some sort of something.
And then he named his daughter after her. I like to think that he decided to name his daughter after her auntie, to just kind of put some worth back into her. But what would you say about that scenario with the avenging of the death?
I mean, I sort of was sitting here just thinking about David and how he set the whole situation up, didn't he? I mean, unwittingly, he didn't know. Like
there was no way he would have known.
Unwittingly, but there may have been inklings around the court. You don't know, do you? Who's whispering what? But he was someone who always went to God, who always asked God, what do I do about this? Okay, God, where do I go next? What happens? What do I do? So I can't imagine that he didn't then take this to God. And he must have sat with him and just gone, this is my daughter.
My only daughter, you know, possibly only daughter.
And his heartache over his children, I know if you've got children, there's so much heartache that goes on when you're bringing up children, but to have this happen in your household, the only way I can understand that David didn't do anything was because he was in conversation with God. That's the only way that makes sense to me.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's what happened.
It helps you sleep better at night.
It helps you sleep better.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, but I'm not sure then how does that play out then? It's okay then to kill her because of this. I hear what you're saying about you've got someone to stand for you and to have your brother to stand for you.
These were different times, right? There was, because, you know, like I said, with the violence with what happened with Dinah, these were different times where people were killed for, it was acceptable, right? Obviously, it's not that we're condoning killing, but if we take a step back from the actual act itself and look at the heart behind it, which was avenging or defending his sister's honor, you know, it's on that note that I'm saying God still raised someone up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we see that David mourned for his son because in losing one son, it felt like he lost two. So Amnon's dead and Absalom flees. So instead of him just losing one child, he loses two. So there was that mourning that happened. Starts with anger, but then after his anger subsides, he starts to remember, oh, I've actually got Absalom and I've lost him as well. So in the process of him mourning for Absalom, and I don't think that he was doing that in secret, we see Joab, as one of his leaders, recognizing the fact that David is missing his son. So what he does is he goes and gets a woman that is unnamed in the Bible, but she's described as the wise woman of Tekoa, and recruits this woman to come and dramatize a scenario for the king. Now, it's interesting because this is the second time that we see that a dramatized story is used to get a reaction out of David. Mm-hmm. The first time we see in the chapter before, when Nathan is coming to give David judgment with what's happened with Bathsheba, and instead of just telling him, King, you've done this, he goes into this story about a man who's only sheep, and you know, all of that happens, and then David realizes in the end that Nathan's talking about him. So whether that's where Joab has borrowed this idea of we will do some kind of drama from, this woman then goes and pretends like she had a problem with two of her sons. So the wise woman of Tekoa, in her wisdom, goes and she says to David, I had two sons. They were fighting and there was nobody there to separate them, and unfortunately one killed the other. And now my son that's alive is about to be banished because, you know, there's some consequence and repercussion that's coming to him from killing his brother. But then she pleads and she gives him this beautiful story to the point that David says he'll be protected. And she keeps on telling him the story, and David's like, don't worry, you know, I've given you my word. It's okay. She's going to, you know, I'm saying he's going to be protected. And then she looks at him and she says, well, why aren't you doing that for your own son? And then reveals what it is that she's talking about. And so David says to her, has Joab got anything to do with this? Because it's kind of like, maybe he knows the people that knows what's going on with him and knows the story. Like, how is this woman going to really know what's going on in the palace? So he says, has Joab got anything to do with this? And yeah, it turns out that, of course, Joab's involved. And David then says Absalom can come back based on this story. I just love that in the restoration story, another woman is involved.
Yeah.
The courage with which she went to go and have that conversation with the king, the way that she was able to portray the story so that he can see in her himself. What do you think about that woman? Is that why the Bible describes her as wise? Or?
Well, she was wise.
She was wise.
I don't know why they picked her, because they did say, find me a wise woman, but then she just seems to take the whole thing up to a different level. Just a thought that occurred to me when you were talking about dramatization. I think there's power in doing things like that, and it's probably one of the reasons why Jesus used parables a lot as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Because people identify with things that make sense to them. It's why we use stories to teach children. But anyway, I digress. The woman did it with a level of finesse that just really brought it to life, and in a way that Joab could not have done, or anybody else could not have done. But I love the fact that she was described as a wise woman. Why couldn't it have been a wise man? Right? Because a man could still have had 2 sons. You know, it could have been the whole scenario, but perhaps there's something there in the wisdom of women and in the passion and you know, just the hearts that women have for their children that makes it easier to tell the story in a way that brings it home to you. I just want to say I take objection to the fact that the Bible records that David was grieving for Absalom. Doesn't tell us anything about how he felt about Tamar. So just saying, David, I don't know what's up, but I just wanted to say that because it upset me.
I was sitting here thinking, no, he lost 2 sons and a daughter. Because she's been, well,
Yes.
that's it. She's not really seen again, is she? That's it. She's left to live in one place in quiet. But
Before we talk about our last woman, we've got about 5 minutes left in this episode. Time runs away with us, surprisingly. The wise woman in Tekoa, I just want to, the God factor in it and the lesson to learn from it is, as women, we've got the power of storytelling. And that when it comes to times of confrontation, one of the things that we can learn from this woman is how we approach difficult situations, that we don't always need to just go and confront and say, you did this, go and get your son back. But perhaps there's a way that we can use parables, like you said about Jesus, or use stories to be able to explain a situation in a way that people can identify.
You need to get them to see it.
To see it from another point of view, because what that does is it removes them from the situation and enables them to have an objective view so that they can see themselves in the story and be able to make the right decision. So that's one of the things that we can take away from this woman's story, the way that we confront people. Okay, lastly, we are still in the David era. Let's talk about Abishag. Now, this is a time when David is very old. He's old, he's, you know, on his way out, but not quite yet. But what they found was he was so cold that the amount of blankets that they used at the time couldn't keep him warm.
So they needed
So they needed something.
They needed
a human
body
blanket,
heat.
actually. They needed a human blanket. So, so the recommendation was to look for a beautiful virgin to keep the king
Because it's
warm.
a different kind of heat
It's a
when it's a
different-
young virgin, right?
It's a different, but it wasn't anything sexual because the Bible does record that they didn't have
I agree.
that
I just
kind of
still have
encounter.
questions.
But it was really about her being a human blanket. You have a lot to say about Abishag. Let's hear it.
No. I just the whole thing is just interesting to me, right? Okay, so you need a warm body. Bathsheba was there. There was a whole lot of other people who had warm bodies. It is interesting though, because it wasn't about there was no sex or anything like that, and they said she was just there, and she sort of brought an energy to him, which I find quite interesting. And I just wonder, as a young girl, how she would have felt, whether she would have seen that as an honor or whether she would have felt used. But whatever it is, the sense I get from reading that is that she did it with dignity. She did it in a way that it was worthy of being mentioned, because since when she was brought into David's life, there was a change. You know, the thing that they wanted her to come and do, her presence actually accomplished. So I just find that quite interesting, because how do you equip a young girl to be this thing to a king? You know, it's just amazing.
Yeah, the bits that I read about it was quite interesting. The sense of it couldn't be a queen because of the dignity. You know, they wouldn't have gone and done that, and it couldn't have been one of the concubines because otherwise there could have been some rivalry and caused issues. And you couldn't have put anyone who was male in that position. That would not have worked. That could have brought all sorts of questions in. So that and then the thought of a beautiful woman was the servants saying how much we honour you, our King, how much we bring to you, you know, your old age, and we want to lavish you with this beautiful young virgin woman. I know it does sound a bit strange, but I quite like that sense of the honouring in that, and that she was then made a person of honour as well through the job she was given.
Yeah, and actually, because she was, I love that you brought that perspective, because she was seen as a woman of honor, when there started to be rivalry with the king's sons about who's going to be king, so we see Adonijah wanting to take his father's throne automatically by force, and then in the end, Solomon is crowned king. But he sneakily goes to Bathsheba and then says to her, grant me this request. No, he starts by saying, you know I'm supposed to be king, yeah? But I'm supposed to be, you know I'm supposed to be king. However, God chose Solomon, so let's respect God. But in the meantime, why don't you do this thing for me? Give me, say to Solomon to give me this woman of integrity, this woman of honor, this beautiful young woman as my bride. And we see how that ends out because Solomon doesn't like that idea very much. It's another way of usurping his authority, and obviously that leads to Adonijah's death. But there was just something about, even after David had passed away, because of the way that she carried herself, she was still a woman that was wanted by one of the king's sons. So we've come to the end of another beautiful episode. We've talked about women who played their part in changing history. We talked about women that went through difficult circumstances, but even through their stories, we can see God. We see that God of justice, we see that God of restoration, we see the God of vengeance. It plays out in different ways, but through it, one thing that we know is that God is in the middle of all these stories. It's been such a pleasure hosting this show today and talking to Angie and my sister. Until next week, when we come with another episode of the Empower Women Show, stay blessed. Thank you for joining us on the show today.